Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. There are moments in life when you discover that someone you love has been viewing your relationship through a completely different lens than you have. And the revelation is so shocking that it fundamentally changes how you see not just that person, but yourself and your own judgment. For me, that moment came when I overheard my girlfriend of 8 months casually describing me to her best friend as nothing more than a wallet she hadn't finished emptying yet. The relationship had begun in what seemed like the most promising way possible. I met Vanessa at a housewarming party thrown by my college friend, who had just bought his first place and wanted to celebrate with friends. I had almost skipped the party entirely, feeling drained after a particularly demanding week at the marketing firm where I worked as an account manager. Still, my friend had been persistent about wanting his core group there for the celebration. Vanessa was immediately noticeable when I arrived at the party, not just because she was strikingly attractive, but because she seemed to be the gravitational center around which the entire social dynamic revolved. She moves effortlessly between different groups of people and somehow manages to make each conversation feel like the most interesting one happening at the party. I spent the first hour of the evening observing Vanessa from a distance, struck by her confidence and social ease. She was the kind of person who could walk into any room and immediately command attention without seeming to try. Someone who possessed that rare combination of beauty, charisma, and apparent warmth that made her magnetic to everyone around her. I assumed she was probably dating someone already, given how many guys at the party seemed to be vying for her attention. It was my friend, who was hosting the housewarming party, who eventually facilitated our introduction, pulling me into a conversation where Vanessa was describing a recent event at the boutique marketing agency where she worked as a social media coordinator. She was funny and engaging, asking thoughtful questions about my work and seeming genuinely interested in my responses. What I expected to be a brief social exchange turned into a conversation that lasted well over an hour. By the time the party was winding down, Vanessa and I had discovered that we shared similar tastes and had a comparable sense of humor. When I suggested that we exchange numbers to continue our discussion afterwards, she agreed. The weeks following the party were a whirlwind of dates and getting to know you conversations that exceeded all my expectations about how well two people could connect. Vanessa was intelligent, ambitious, and seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with me. She had stories about her work, her travels, and her goals that made her seem like someone who was actively building an interesting life rather than just drifting through her 20s. During our third date, Vanessa mentioned that she wasn't seeing anyone else and wasn't interested in casual dating, which relieved me since I had already developed serious feelings for her. By our sixth date, we were spending entire weekends together, and I was beginning to think that I had found someone with whom I could build something meaningful and lasting. After 4 months of regular dating, I asked Vanessa to be my official girlfriend during a weekend trip we took to a cabin in the mountains. She accepted enthusiastically, telling me that she had been hoping I would ask, and that she was excited about where our relationship was heading. That weekend felt like a turning point toward something serious and committed, and I remember feeling incredibly fortunate to have found someone who seemed so perfectly compatible with my personality and life goals. As our relationship became official and we settled into a more established routine, I began to notice certain patterns in how we handled financial aspects of our time together. From our very first date, I had naturally assumed the role of paying for dinner, drinks, and entertainment, partly because I earned more than Vanessa did and partly because I wanted to demonstrate that I was capable of providing for someone I cared about. Vanessa never offered to split bills or cover costs herself, but she also never demanded that I pay for everything. Instead, she would simply assume that I would handle the check when it arrived, thanking me graciously and mentioning how much she appreciated my generosity. This dynamic felt traditional and comfortable at first, especially since Vanessa would often suggest activities or restaurants that were within what I considered a reasonable budget for our social life. However, as the months progressed, I began to notice that Vanessa's expectations about what I should cover were gradually expanding. What had started with dinners and movie tickets evolved to include weekend trips, designer handbags, expensive skincare products, and other luxury items that she would admire in stores, and then somehow expect me to purchase for her as surprise gifts or special occasion presents. Vanessa had a way of making these expectations seem natural and reasonable without ever directly asking for specific items. She would mention how stressed she was about not being able to afford these things, or how embarrassed she felt driving her aging car, or how difficult it was to keep up with rent while trying to save money for her future goals. These conversations would plant seeds of concern in my mind that would eventually bloom into offers to help her financially. Looking back, I can see how skillfully Vanessa managed these situations to make me feel like the hero who was solving her problems rather than someone being manipulated into providing financial support. When I offered to pay for her marketing certification course, she responded with such genuine gratitude and excitement that I felt like I was investing in both her future and our relationship. When I co-signed for her new car lease because her credit wasn't strong enough to qualify on her own, she framed it as a temporary arrangement that would help her build credit history. Over the course of several months, I found myself covering not just her entertainment expenses, but significant portions of her living costs. I was paying for her rent when she claimed to be short due to unexpected expenses, buying her groceries when she mentioned that her budget was tight, and purchasing clothes, jewelry, and electronics that she presented as necessities rather than luxuries. Vanessa had developed a repertoire of phrases that she used to justify my financial contributions to her lifestyle. She would remind me that men were supposed to provide for women they cared about, suggesting that my willingness to cover her expenses was evidence of my maturity and commitment to our relationship. She would point out that I was doing well financially and could afford to help her, implying that refusing to do so would be selfish and inconsiderate. Most manipulatively, Vanessa would frequently compare our relationship to those of her friends, mentioning how their boyfriends had bought them expensive jewelry, taken them on exotic vacations, or surprised them with designer gifts. These comparisons were always delivered in a casual conversational tone, but they created a sense of competition and inadequacy that motivated me to prove that I was just as generous and devoted as these other men. Despite the growing financial burden of supporting Vanessa's lifestyle, I convinced myself that I was simply being a good partner and investing in someone I loved. She was affectionate, attentive, and seemed genuinely happy in our relationship, which made me feel like my financial contributions were appreciated and reciprocated through emotional intimacy and companionship. But underneath my rationalizations, I was beginning to feel like an ATM rather than a boyfriend. Vanessa's expressions of love and appreciation seemed to coincide with my purchases and financial support, while her mood would noticeably shift when I was unable or unwilling to cover expenses she had anticipated. The connection between my spending and her affection gradually became too obvious to ignore, even though I wasn't ready to confront what that pattern might mean about her true feelings for me. The revelation that would end our relationship came during a weekend trip we took to a beach resort about 3 hours from a city. I had planned and paid for the entire getaway as a celebration of Vanessa's recent promotion at work, booking a nice hotel room, making dinner reservations at upscale restaurants, and covering all our activities and entertainment for the 3-day weekend. The trip itself was enjoyable and felt like a return to the easy intimacy we had shared during the early months of our relationship. Vanessa was relaxed, affectionate, and seemed genuinely grateful for the effort and expense I had put into planning our time away together. We spent Saturday at the beach, had a romantic dinner that evening, and spent Sunday exploring the town and shopping at local boutiques, where I bought Vanessa several items she admired. We returned to my apartment on Sunday evening, both exhausted from the travel and the full weekend of activities. I was particularly tired because I had done all the driving and had been focused on making sure Vanessa enjoyed every aspect of the trip. After unpacking our bags and discussing what a wonderful time we had had, I decided to take a shower and go to bed early so I would be refreshed for an important client meeting I had scheduled for Monday morning. I fell asleep quickly, but was awakened several hours later by the sound of Vanessa talking on the phone in my living room. She often had long conversations with her best friend, usually catching up on work gossip and social plans, so I didn't think much of it initially. I tried to go back to sleep, but found myself drifting in and out of consciousness, occasionally catching fragments of Vanessa's conversation. At first, I was only half listening as Vanessa described our weekend trip to her friend, mentioning the hotel, the restaurants, and the shopping we had done. She seemed to be providing a detailed account of everything we had experienced, and I could hear her laughing at whatever responses Samantha was giving. I was pleased that she was sharing positive details about our time together, interpreting her enthusiastic descriptions as evidence that she had genuinely enjoyed the trip. But as the conversation continued, I couldn't hear her friend's side of the conversation, but I could clearly hear Vanessa's responses, and what I heard made my stomach drop and my chest tighten with a combination of shock and disbelief. Vanessa was explaining to her friend that she loved dating me because I was such a generous spender, which initially seemed like a compliment until I heard what followed. Vanessa laughed at something the friend said and then responded with words that felt like a physical blow. She told her friend that she could dump me anytime because I was just a wallet she hadn't emptied yet. The casual, matter-of-fact way she delivered this assessment of our relationship was almost as shocking as the content itself. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She went on to describe her strategy for maximizing what she could get from me before moving on to someone else. She mentioned specific items and experiences she still wanted me to provide before she would be ready to end our relationship, talking about me like I was a resource to be managed rather than a person she cared about. Most devastatingly, Vanessa told a friend that I wasn't the type of man she wanted for a long-term relationship, like marriage, because, in her assessment, I spent money so freely that I would probably go broke eventually and become a financial liability rather than an asset. She was already planning her exit strategy, waiting only until she had extracted maximum value from our relationship before discarding me for someone with better long-term financial prospects. I lay in bed listening to this conversation with a combination of shock, anger, and an eerie calm that surprised me. Every declaration of love Vanessa had made, every expression of gratitude for my generosity, every moment of intimacy we had shared was suddenly recontextualized as part of an elaborate performance designed to keep me providing for her lifestyle while she planned her eventual departure. The calculated nature of Vanessa's deception was breathtaking. She had systematically identified my desire to be a generous provider and had exploited that trait to fund her lifestyle, while feeling no genuine emotional connection to me or our relationship. I had been completely blind to her manipulation, interpreting her appreciation as love and her dependency as commitment. I decided not to confront Vanessa immediately about what I had overheard. The shock of the revelation had given way to a desire for a more strategic response than an emotional confrontation would provide. I wanted time to think clearly about how to extract myself from the relationship while protecting myself from further exploitation. By the next morning, I had formulated a plan that would allow me to end the relationship while minimizing my losses and sending a clear message that I wasn't the naive victim Vanessa apparently believed me to be. I began by immediately cutting off her access to my financial resources, starting with the credit card I had given her for emergencies and everyday expenses. The first test of this new boundary came when Vanessa tried to fill her gas tank on Monday afternoon and discovered that the card I had provided was no longer working. She called me several times, but I didn't answer until hours later, ensuring that she would have to find another way to cover the expense and understand that her easy access to my money had ended. While Vanessa was dealing with her transportation crisis, I was meeting with a lawyer who specialized in contract disputes and asset recovery. I explained the situation and asked about my options for retrieving items I had purchased for Vanessa, particularly those that were technically in my name or for which I had clear documentation of purchase. He confirmed that most of the gifts and financial support I had provided couldn't be recovered legally, since they had been given voluntarily in the context of a romantic relationship. However, he identified several items that could potentially be reclaimed, including the car lease that was in my name and several expensive electronics and jewelry pieces for which I had retained receipts and documentation. I authorized the lawyer to begin the process of recovering these items, knowing that the legal action would signal to Vanessa that I was aware of her true intentions and wasn't willing to continue being exploited. The lawyer's involvement would also prevent the emotional manipulation and guilt trips that Vanessa would likely attempt if I tried to handle the situation myself. By the end of the week, Vanessa had received legal notices demanding the return of the items that the lawyer had identified as recoverable. She immediately texted me, expressing confusion about why a law firm was contacting her on my behalf and asking what was happening to our relationship. I responded by explaining that I had instructed the legal firm to recover the items I had purchased, since she had made it clear that she viewed me as nothing more than a wallet to be emptied. Vanessa tried to deny making such statements, but I provided specific details about the conversation I had overheard, including her exact words about dumping me and her assessment of my long-term financial prospects. Vanessa's attempts to downplay her comments and reframe them as jokes or misunderstandings fell flat, especially since I had heard enough of the conversation to understand the context and intention behind her words. When she continued trying to reach me by phone, I stopped responding entirely, making it clear that our relationship was over and that further communication would only happen through lawyers. The most telling moment came when Vanessa sent a text asking how she was supposed to handle the embarrassment of explaining to people that I had taken back the things I had bought for her. Her concern wasn't about losing me or our relationship, but about the social awkwardness of having to account for the sudden disappearance of the lifestyle I had been funding. I told Vanessa that I didn't care about her embarrassment and blocked her on all social media platforms and communication channels. The relationship was over, and I had no interest in helping her manage the social consequences of her deception being exposed. The lawyer was successful in recovering some of the items I had purchased, including the car and several pieces of expensive jewelry and electronics. However, the majority of what I had spent on Vanessa, the trips, dinners, rent payments, and countless small luxuries, was gone forever. The financial cost of the relationship was significant, but the emotional education I received was invaluable. Vanessa made attempts to salvage her reputation by telling mutual friends that I had misunderstood her conversation with her friend and that she hadn't meant her comments the way they sounded. She tried to frame our breakup as a result of my overreaction to what she claimed was just casual friend gossip rather than a reflection of her true feelings. Several mutual friends reached out to me on Vanessa's behalf, suggesting that I was throwing away a good relationship over a misunderstanding and that I should give her a chance to explain and make amends. But I had heard enough of Vanessa's conversation to know exactly what she meant, and her subsequent behavior had confirmed rather than contradicted the mercenary nature of her feelings toward me. I told our mutual friends that the relationship was permanently over, and that I had no interest in reconciliation or further discussion about Vanessa's motivations or intentions. The revelation of how she truly viewed me had been so complete and devastating that there was no possibility of rebuilding trust or intimacy. Vanessa made attempts to salvage her reputation by telling mutual friends that I had misunderstood her conversation with Samantha and that she hadn't meant her comments the way they sounded. She tried to frame our breakup as a result of my overreaction to what she claimed was just casual friend gossip rather than a reflection of her true feelings. Her version of events, as it was relayed back to me by concerned friends, painted me as jealous, controlling, and prone to dramatic overreactions. She claimed that I had invaded her privacy by listening to a private phone conversation and had taken her words out of context in order to justify ending our relationship. According to Vanessa's narrative, she was the victim of my unreasonable behavior rather than someone who had been exposed for manipulating and exploiting me. Several mutual friends reached out to me on Vanessa's behalf, suggesting that I was throwing away a good relationship over a misunderstanding and that I should give her a chance to explain and make amends. Jake, who had introduced us originally, was particularly persistent in his attempts to mediate what he saw as a resolvable conflict between two people who cared about each other. These friends argued that everyone says things they don't mean when venting to close friends, and that Vanessa's comments to her best friend shouldn't be taken as evidence of her true feelings about our relationship. They pointed out that she seemed genuinely distressed about our breakup and was willing to do whatever it took to repair the damage she had caused. But I had heard enough of Vanessa's conversation to know exactly what she meant, and her subsequent behavior had confirmed rather than contradicted the mercenary nature of her feelings toward me. The calculated way she had planned to extract more value from our relationship before discarding me, combined with her assessment of my long-term unsuitability as a partner, left no room for misinterpretation. I told our mutual friends that the relationship was permanently over, and that I had no interest in reconciliation or further discussion about Vanessa's motivations or intentions. The revelation of how she truly viewed me had been so complete and devastating that there was no possibility of rebuilding trust or intimacy. The months following the breakup were a period of reflection and personal growth that ultimately made me grateful for the painful lesson Vanessa had taught me about my own vulnerability to manipulation. I threw myself into work, reconnected with friends I had neglected during the relationship, and began the process of rebuilding my self-confidence and judgment. I started seeing a therapist to help me understand how I had become so completely blind to Vanessa's manipulation and exploitation. The therapist helped me recognize that my desire to be seen as a generous provider had made me vulnerable to someone skilled at identifying and exploiting that particular weakness. She helped me understand that my eagerness to prove my worth through financial generosity had prevented me from seeing the warning signs that were clearly present throughout the relationship. Through therapy, I began to understand that Vanessa had systematically identified my insecurities about not being interesting or attractive enough for someone like her, and had exploited those insecurities to make me feel grateful for her attention and willing to pay any price to keep it. Her constant reminders about how lucky I was to have her, combined with her comparisons to other men's spending, had created a dynamic where I felt like I had to constantly prove my worth through increasingly expensive gestures. The therapist also helped me recognize that my family background had contributed to my vulnerability to this type of manipulation. Growing up as an only child with parents who expressed love primarily through gift-giving and financial support, I had learned to equate generosity with affection and had never developed healthy boundaries around money in relationships. Most importantly, I learned to recognize the red flags that I had ignored or rationalized during my relationship with Vanessa. The constant financial pressure, the comparisons to other men's spending, the lack of reciprocity in our financial dynamic, and the way her affection seemed tied to my generosity were all warning signs that I had dismissed because I was so focused on feeling needed and appreciated. I also began to understand that Vanessa's manipulation had been sophisticated and deliberate rather than unconscious or accidental. Her ability to make me feel like the hero solving her problems, rather than someone being exploited for financial gain, showed a level of emotional intelligence and strategic thinking that made her particularly dangerous to someone with my psychological profile. The experience taught me that genuine love involves seeing and valuing someone for who they are rather than what they can provide, and that healthy relationships require mutual respect and contribution rather than one-sided financial support disguised as romance. While the cost of learning these lessons was high, the knowledge has protected me from similar exploitation in subsequent relationships. I made concrete changes to how I approach dating and relationships based on what I learned from the Vanessa experience. I've learned to be wary of anyone who seems more interested in my financial situation than in my personality, interests, or values. Most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts when something feels wrong in a relationship, even when I can't immediately identify the source of my discomfort. The feeling that I was being treated like an ATM rather than a partner was accurate, and I should have addressed those concerns directly rather than suppressing them in favor of maintaining what I thought was a loving relationship. Looking back, I realized that Vanessa's casual dismissal of me as a wallet she hadn't finished emptying was actually a gift, even though it didn't feel like one at the time. Her words revealed the truth about our relationship in a way that allowed me to end it with clarity and purpose rather than continuing to be deceived and exploited indefinitely.